Geeks, I have a funny story for you. At the beginning of the pandemic, the British government gave loans out to help support businesses, just like they did here. And some of these loans turned into investments into companies, and one of them is a party planning company. But not just any party planning company. I knew the British were kinkier than they appear. I do fancy a little footsie now and then. The owner of the company even said that she never envisaged Boris Johnson as a sleeping partner. I never thought I would have to say those words in the same sentence. We got a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about the G7 and NATO summits, the latest in Ukraine, where the US now ranks globally on abortion, LGBTQ plus communities at risk, and a Russian journalist who's helping Ukrainian kids. Before we start though, show me some love and please hit that subscribe button below. Don't forget the notification bell and like this video, even before you watch it. Geeks, it's prom time, which means it's time for the annual G7 and NATO summits. Become a FOPO geek and you can live prom for the rest of your life. The G7 is the group of 7 nations that have the largest economies in the world, and they meet every year to discuss a range of political, economic, and security priorities. And by the way, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson thinks he's the hottest date at this prom. Look at how open his shirt is. They agreed to explore a plan that was devised by US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen that would look to cap the price of Russian oil. The idea is basically that you group together everyone involved in purchasing oil, so governments, shipping companies, insurance companies, etc., and they all unite and tell Russia that they're not buying their oil unless it's a certain price. And so limiting that price would prevent Russia from reaping a ton of profit off the oil they do continue to sell, while also having the added benefit of preventing oil prices from further increasing, because then the overall amount of oil supply on the global market would stay the same. So it's a win-win. But is it? Let's geek out a bit. Some say this idea is iffy, since who's to say everyone's gonna buy in? And also, if the oil is deeply discounted, won't China and India just buy more of it? They're already gobbling up Russia's oil. And then how do you really know how it'll play out in the global market? Or Russia could react by saying, F you all, we're gonna punish you by removing our oil from the market altogether, which could then drive prices up to $200 a barrel. I asked you all if you think this plan could work, and 67% of you said yes. Oil is a tricky business, which is a friendly reminder to our leadership as to why renewable energy may be kind of urgent. Clearly the G7 knows that all this talk about oil makes them look a little off-brand on climate change, since they also announced they would be creating a climate club. But environmentalists were clearly unimpressed. President Zelensky spoke to the G7, and he expressed his hope for the war to end by the end of the year, which brings us to the importance of the NATO summit, which took place just after the G7 meetings. More on that next. I would say the NATO summit that took place this week is one of the most important in its history. NATO's original purpose when it was created in 1949 by a group of Western states was to create a defense alliance in order to provide collective security against the Soviet Union. And so now that Russia has invaded a country bordering NATO territory, projecting NATO's strength and unity is more important than ever. And luckily, that's exactly what happened this week. NATO countries promised more military aid to Ukraine, and they heavily beefed up their troops along NATO's borders from 40,000 to 300,000. But perhaps the most important decision made at this summit is that Turkey, which is a member of NATO, reached an agreement with Finland and Sweden to allow them to join the club too. One of Putin's biggest goals in invading Ukraine was to weaken NATO and divide its membership, and to ensure it never expanded further. And now the opposite has happened. This show of strength comes amid a few concerning developments in the Ukraine war. Russia has secured control over the eastern industrial city of Severodonetsk, which basically solidifies their control over the eastern side of Ukraine. And this week they bombed a shopping mall in a central city of the country, and they did it during the day when civilians were innocently shopping there. Of course, Russia claims the mall was a weapons depot, but that's such a blatant lie, and it's easy to know that because if it were the truth, then they would have likely struck it at night, which is when most militaries do it. But they did it during the day because they deliberately wanted to kill civilians, which is exactly how dictators fight war. They terrorize innocent civilians to make them live in fear and to push their governments into surrendering. So Russia couldn't stand that here you had people living normally. They wanted to remind them that Russia controls that, and Russia can turn their lives upside down in a second. It's pure terror. This week, you also have the trial starting for WNBA star Brittany Griner, whom experts say will likely be convicted, which means that some kind of prisoner swap or other diplomatic exchange will be her only way out. Now, there are some signs as well that Russia is suffering. They just defaulted on a $100 million bond payment, not because they didn't have the funds, but because they're so financially isolated that no one wants to touch their money anymore. And being that radioactive will eventually catch up with them. But the problem is Russia is pulling out every criminal card it can think of, and democracies just don't fight the way dictatorships do. We don't go deliberately target shopping malls or maternity hospitals to terrorize innocent civilians. And the only way Russia will stop is if it genuinely feels a military threat. Now, the US and Europe are giving Zelensky a lot of military support, but in light of the attack on the shopping mall, and given how long this may go and how expensive it could become, they may want to consider creating a more sustainable way for Ukraine to defend itself. And the only way to really do that is by helping them create a missile defense system that shoots down missiles coming at them, kind of like the Iron Dome Israel has. Something to consider. You didn't think we'd go through the show without talking about the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, did you? No matter where you stand on abortion, you need to know where the US now ranks on abortion rights globally and what that could mean for us in the long term. But before that, I want to share an interesting historical tidbit my researcher Ileana dug up, which is that before 1973, the laws we had in the United States banning abortion were not because of the life of the baby, but because unsafe abortions were killing pregnant women. Even today, illegal abortions are more dangerous than legal ones, since they tend to be conducted by people with less training. Access to safe abortion is established as a human right by many international institutions and frameworks, including ones that the United States is part of. And around the world, the trend is that more and more countries are adopting more liberal abortion laws. Just in the last 2 years, Argentina and Thailand legalized abortions. Mexico and South Korea decriminalized abortion. New Zealand eased its abortion restrictions. And Colombia, which is a very Catholic country, made abortion legal on demand up to 24 weeks of pregnancy. We're now part of a really small group of countries like Honduras and Poland that are taking steps to tighten abortion restrictions. In fact, I want to read a quote from you from the Council on Foreign Relations, which says that in recent years, a number of countries, particularly autocracies, have pushed back against the expansion of women's and reproductive rights. Globally, 24 countries ban abortion entirely, no matter the case. Most industrialized countries allow abortion without any restriction, but we're not in that bucket anymore. We're in the bucket of around 100 countries, the majority of which are developing nations, that typically permit abortion in limited situations. In fact, 93% of the countries with the most restrictive abortion laws are developing nations. So why does this all matter? Well, aside from the fact that this decision will have a huge impact on women's health, our labor force, and therefore the strength of our economy, some of the core tenets of US foreign policy are to promote democracy and human rights abroad. But we're not going to look so credible if we're not guaranteeing an established human right here in the United States that the majority of Americans want. Not only will we not look credible as a leader in global affairs, but other countries are starting to pity us. Leaders from France, the UK, Germany, and many others issued statements condemning this decision and underscoring why access to safe abortion is so important and will remain protected in their own countries. Even this asshole, the head of the WHO, who sucks and who should be focusing on monkeypox, is criticizing us. So no matter where you stand on this issue, it's important to know where we rank globally, because it's a little embarrassing, but also because this decision could prevent us from having any moral authority on other health, human rights, or economic issues on the world stage. Even during Pride Month, a time when the LGBTQ+ community and allies celebrate, they're reminded around the world of the threats they continue to face. In Oslo, Norway, an Islamist extremist with a history of mental illness attacked individuals by going on a shooting spree at a gay bar and in the areas around it on the day the country was due to celebrate its Pride Parade. As a result of this terrorist attack, 2 died and 21 were wounded, and countless were left in fear. In Saudi Arabia, which is not a friendly place for the community in general, the kingdom decided to ban and confiscate toys, clothes, and any other items that have rainbows on them because they believe it's too similar to the pride flag and would promote homosexuality in youth. The Saudi government is so threatened by the LGBTQ+ community that the rainbow scares them. But allowing men to sexually abuse young boys, that's allowed there. If you don't think these policies affect the United States, then think again. Because of censorship rules in Saudi Arabia and also other countries like the UAE, Kuwait, and Malaysia, Disney wanted to cut out a scene from Pixar's latest movie, Lightyear, which includes a same-sex kiss between 2 lesbian characters. So Pixar's animators spoke out against Disney, and so the scene remains, and the movie will not be playing in those countries. Threats to the community also exist here, as evidenced when 31 members of a white supremacist organization called Patriot Front were arrested near a Pride event for conspiracy to riot. These men were in a U-Haul truck and were wearing masks and shields, and they had riot gear and a smoke grenade. I don't mean to get depressing as we close out Pride Month, but I want to remind people that the support for this community has to last all year because they need it. For this level of hatred and violence, and for making anyone from the LGBTQ+ community feel as though they should live in fear or feel targeted, all these homophobic thugs and criminals are on my list this week. Geeks, you're gonna love this story. A Russian journalist named Dmitry Muratov auctioned off his Nobel Peace Prize medal for $103.5 million, and he donated all the proceeds to UNICEF to help displaced Ukrainian children. This story is all levels of cool. Dmitry Muratov is the editor-in-chief of an independent Russian news outlet called Novaya Gazeta, which he co-founded in 1993. This newspaper conducts in-depth investigations into human rights issues, corruption, and the abuse of power in Russia. And when it started out, the employees had no salary. In fact, former Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev donated some of his Nobel Peace Prize money to pay for salaries and computers for this publication. And now Muratov is doing the same thing, but to help Ukrainian kids. He won the Nobel Peace Prize last year, along with Maria Ressa, who's another amazing activist journalist from the Philippines we once put on the crush list. And they won it because of their efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, because it's preconditioned for democracy and lasting peace. Muratov himself has been very publicly critical of the Russian government, including its annexation of Crimea and its aggression against Ukraine. And his newspaper has published numerous stories exposing the Russian government's financial crimes, human rights abuses, and corruption. He has faced death threats for his work, and 6 journalists with his publication have been killed while he's been there. Just this past April, he was attacked with red paint while on a train in Russia, which US intelligence says was coordinated by Russian intelligence. And he's doing this while living in Russia. He said that this award was an opportunity for him to share it with people, and no one expected the bidding to go as high as it did. In fact, he shattered the record for auctioning a Nobel medal by nearly $100 million. Over 7.5 million Ukrainian children have been affected by the ongoing conflict, and so his funds will help get them life-saving health and medical supplies, safe water, schooling, and mental health support, among many other things. If you're feeling inspired, please consider making a donation to UNICEF's Fund for Ukrainian Children. Thanks, Geeks! Before you go, I have some good news! We have finally figured out how to solve our plastic problem. Superworms! A study has shown that when presented with no other food other than plastic, they eat it. I feel like that's a bit of a trick lab test, but whatever. Anyway, they ate a whole bunch of styrofoam, and apparently they were still fine. So now we just gotta dump a bunch of them into landfills, and in 100 years or so, we'll have solved our plastic problem. Before you go, please like this video, click the subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you want me to talk about something, let me know over social media, and I'll definitely give you a shout out. Stay fabulous, Geeks.